Hi everyone and welcome to this video about using the Divisimate Loopback port. So in the last video I showed how you can use the Divisimate Loopback port in Cubase. How to work with a control track on which you can edit and prepare pre-recorded MIDI and send it over to Divisimate to be split up and orchestrated. Of course, this method can be used in other DAWs as well, so I wanted to give you a quick rundown how to set this up in different sequencers. I will try to keep it short and simple for each DAW, simply covering the steps to set up the track that serves as input in Divisimate and covering essential information. You're probably only interested in a specific DAW, so feel free to skip ahead to any of these timecodes in the video to watch the instructions for your software of choice. We also put these timecodes in the video description. Let's get started. In Reaper, most of the time, MIDI devices have to be enabled before they can be used. So the first thing you want to do is go to the Reaper preferences, visit the MIDI devices tab and check if the Divisimate Loopback port on the output side and of course all the other Divisimate ports on the input side are enabled. In my case, it looks like the loopback port is not enabled as an output, so I'll right click on it and choose Enable Output to activate it. Next, I create a new track and give it a fitting name first. Then in the input menu, I can select the MIDI input for this track. Make sure you don't use all MIDI inputs or any Divisimate port as input to avoid building a feedback loop. In my case, I will just select my keyboard. Now we go into the routing for this track, and here we will find the MIDI hardware output panel. Since we enable the loopback port, we can choose it here as MIDI hardware output and send whatever is happening on this track to Divisimate. Make sure to have only the loopback input activated in Divisimate as an input, and voila! Now anything happening on this loopback track will serve as input for Divisimate. So I could drag and drop a MIDI file on here and we can see on the keyboard display that the notes from the track are being recognized as an input in Divisimate. And since I connected my keyboard to this track, when I record enable this track, the notes from my keyboard can get sent through this track to Divisimate and be recorded at the same time. As usual, Logic Pro is a bit less flexible when it comes to MIDI routing for recording, so I'll go in a bit more detail here. Using the loopback port in the demonstrated way will take up one of your 16 channels for MIDI recording, but apart from that it works fine. I'll show you on the example of the Swarm Big Band template for Logic Pro. Here's how it works. First of all, make sure to have only the loopback active as an input in Divisimate. In Logic, open the MIDI environment and go to the Click and Ports layer. In this window, click on New and choose New MIDI Instrument. Let's move this instrument over here. And over on the left, we can adjust the settings for this instrument. First, let's give it a name and call it To Loopback. Next, from the long menu of possible ports for the instrument, choose the Divisimate Loopback port. And this is very important for this to work, set the MIDI channel to 16, since we want to use the 16th channel for the loopback. It's used by the drums in this template, which is the instrument I'm least likely to perform through Divisimate. So if I have to give up one of my 16 channels, this is the one that is most expandable to me. Now connect your MIDI controllers directly to this instrument. In my case, that is my keyboard and my breath controller. And then connect the output of the instrument to your sequencer input. Logic will now ask me if I want to remove the channel port setting, but I want to keep the channel I set on the instrument, so I click on Don't Remove. So that's it for the environment. Now go to your tracks, right click on the drums and in the Reassign dialog select the To Loopback instrument. Now anything happening on this track will be sent to the loopback port and it will also record my MIDI controllers I routed to the loopback on this track. So now I can record my raw input and my big band at the same time. So now I have the raw input down here and the split parts up here. I can delete the split parts for now and simply play back the MIDI on the loopback track, so I can freely modify the notes and the orchestration on the fly. And once I'm happy with this result, I just record my tracks once more. I'm gonna get a duplicate on the loopback track, which I will delete, and to continue working with the recorded instrument tracks, I can deactivate or mute my loopback track. One more little thing, if you want to record tracks separately with this setup, instead of bypassing Divisimate, turn Divisimate off to avoid duplicates, since your controllers are already routed to the sequencer input in Logic. In ProTools, the setup is pretty straightforward. Simply add a MIDI track to your project and go to the mixer view to prepare the routing. You may find your physical inputs tucked away behind the predefined submenu. On the input side, choose your keyboard or nothing at all as an input. Just make sure you don't use the All option or any Divisimate port as an input to avoid building a feedback loop. Then choose the Divisimate Loopback port as an output, once again hidden away in the predefined menu. Make sure to have the loopback input activated in Divisimate. And voila! Now anything happening on this loopback track will serve as input for Divisimate. So I could drag and drop a MIDI file on here, and as we see on the keyboard display, the notes from the MIDI file are being fed into Divisimate as an input. And since I selected my keyboard as an input for the loopback track, I can also record my live playing on the loopback track as well. In Studio One, all MIDI devices that you are planning to use need to be added manually first, before you can use them on any tracks. So the first thing we need to do is go to Studio One Options into the External Devices tab. So not only do you need to add the regular Divisimate ports you want to use here, but you also need to add the loopback port as an external instrument. So we click on Add, and this is important, choose New Instrument. Let's call the device Divisimate Loopback. Since we want to use this as an output only, we leave it to receive from none, and below that we choose Send to Divisimate Loopback. MIDI channel 1 is fine, all those settings down here are not so important, so I go ahead and click OK. Now we have successfully added the loopback port as an external instrument. When I now add a track to my project, I can actually set up everything I need in this dialog. First, I select my keyboard as an input. I could also select nothing at all if I don't want to perform it live. Just make sure you don't use the All Inputs option or any Divisimate port as an input to avoid building a feedback loop. And now when I choose from the list of existing instruments, I can choose the Divisimate Loopback. Any of these settings I could change as well here in the settings for the tracks. So finally, the last thing we need to do is make sure that Divisimate is receiving only from the loopback input and not from my keyboard. And then we're done. Anything happening on this loopback track will serve as input for Divisimate. So when I record on this track, you see the notes showing up on the keyboard display in Divisimate. And the same thing is true when I play them back again. If I had instrument tracks over here, I could record the resulting orchestration on these tracks in the same project. And this kind of loopback track can be simply added to any project that you already have. The setup of a loopback track in Ableton is pretty simple. All you need to do is make sure that the Divisimate Loopback port is activated as an output in the MIDI settings. If you don't see it as an output option on a MIDI track, go to the MIDI preferences, scroll down past the input ports and click this button here to activate it as possible output for MIDI tracks. Now I can select my keyboard and another controller or no input at all for my MIDI track. Just make sure to not use all ins or any Divisimate port here. And then select the Divisimate Loopback port as the output for the MIDI track. Finally, make sure to have the loopback input activated as the only input in Divisimate on the settings page. And then we're done. Anything happening on this loopback track will serve as input for Divisimate now. So I can record something here and it will be sent to Divisimate, as you can see on the keyboard display. And when I play it back, the exact same recorded notes will be sent to Divisimate again. So if I have any instrument tracks in my project hooked up to the Divisimate ports, I can record the orchestrated result right here. There is one little catch with Ableton Live that you should be aware of. Ableton does seem to be built in a way that this method of sending notes to Divisimate and receiving them back introduces some additional latency based on the size of your audio buffer. While other DAWs introduce almost no delay at all, particularly on Mac, Ableton introduces a latency of about twice your system latency, and there is nothing we can do about that. So ironically, in Ableton Live, this method is less suited for complex live performances, but more useful for using pre-recorded MIDI where you can compensate for this latency. So that's it. This is how to set up a Divisimate Loopback track in 5 different DAWs. Since Divisimate is essentially a middleware and it can be used with a wide variety of different DAWs and other music software, the amount of different ways of working and quirks of specific softwares can get quite overwhelming. This video was a bit of an experiment how to efficiently convey information for multiple DAWs in one go. Please let us know if you found this helpful and what you think of this format of combining multiple things into one video. So long, thank you for watching and see you on the next video.